Well, thank you for everybody for being with us, and thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to be with all of you. It's a very difficult task, as I was mentioning yesterday, to summarize 100 years in 3 minutes, but I'll do my best. And for those who would like a more in-depth analysis, look at Dr. Denis's book. And I would also recommend The Oldest Colony in the World by Dr. Trias Monge. But really, for folks that aren't familiar with Puerto Rico, what you need to know is that after 400 years of being a colony under Spain, after the U.S. Spanish-American War, Puerto Rico, Cuba, the Philippines, and Guam became part of the United States. Now, that word part is very controversial, as Dr. Denis and others know, because the U.S. Supreme Court decision said that Puerto Rico is foreign in a domestic sense, and that Puerto Rico is owned by but not a part of the United States. So trying to be definitive in describing Puerto Rico-U.S. relations is on the onset very difficult. So basically, Puerto Ricans are a nation of 3.5 million people with their own language, national identity, and recently a National Olympic team, as you saw. We won the gold medal for women's tennis, which we're all very proud of, Monica Puig. And that sometimes seems a bit contradictory when you juxtapose that to being a U.S. Commonwealth under the U.S. flag. We're U.S. citizens by birth since 1917. And how we got to that, you know, it's just a lot to describe. But basically what you need to know is Puerto Rico has sort of like a state government like Alabama or Florida, but it's considered a Latin American country culturally. So our state structure is under a constitution, just like any state, but we don't pay any federal income taxes, so Puerto Ricans pay federal payroll taxes. And we don't have any representation in Congress, any voting representation in Congress, and we don't vote for president. You can call that, you know, anything you like, territorial, colonial, commonwealth, but there is a deficit of democracy in that we do not participate, consent, nor vote for the people that legislate and impose regulations on us. But we do have our own constitution with a state government that was supposed to be autonomous. But with the subject we're going to talk about today, which is PROMESA, which is a congressional law, it imposed a financial control board on Puerto Rico that has ultimate say basically on anything related to the finances and the budget of Puerto Rico, which is everything. And so that creates a problem of an added layer of colonial rule over Puerto Rico that we didn't have before. And I'll be happy to answer questions as I know that we're wrapping up, but basically it's different from Washington, D.C. and New York City or Detroit, where they had limited congressional mandated or state mandated financial control boards, in that they do vote for president and Congress, and they do work for their state government that impose those financial control boards. In the case of Puerto Rico, again, this is not a city. It's a country. It's under the U.S. flag. And yes, I'll wrap up in a second. But basically, Puerto Rico doesn't vote for the people that impose the board on them. And so right now, the only elected officials we do have are rendered useless in a way, because all the ultimate decisions over our budgets, regulations, and other criteria will be taken by 7 unelected people appointed by the president. But I know I have to wrap up, so I'll be happy to answer questions and explain more in further terms.
Thank you. Dr. Negron Velasquez?
Yes, hi. In the book of Nelson Denis, I really recommend the book to everyone. He explains in detail the context in which the colonial relationship between Puerto Rico and the United States began. Puerto Rico was treated as a prize for the winners of the Hispanic War. And like Federico said, Puerto Rico is a territory, but it's not part of the USA, but it belongs to the USA. Like if it were a thing, una cosa, it belongs to somebody. Dr. Denis, he talks about how the dominant white Anglo culture decided that the people from Puerto Rico were either too dark, too dumb, did not speak English, and so on. Attributes that show how different we were from them. and how they use these attributes to discriminate against Puerto Ricans. Even today, we're treated different if you're a Puerto Rican living in the island or if you're a Puerto Rican living in the USA. On the island, we cannot vote for the president of the USA, like Federico mentioned. We cannot participate in specific social services programs, such as supplemental social security income. There's still disparity in the health budget assigned to Puerto Rico compared to the states, affecting programs such as Medicare and Medicaid. PROMESA really sends us back 115 years, very similar to how our government was under the Foraker Law and the Jones Act. At that time, the governor was designated by the president of the USA, and that person had more power than the legislature. We may conclude that with the enactment of PROMESA, the structure of the political and economic models that we have used for the past 7 decades to sustain and resolve our internal issues is obviously fake. If a group of 7 people who were not elected by the people of Puerto Rico have more power than the Constitution of our country, there's indeed absolutely no doubt that Puerto Rico is a colony of the USA.
Thank you.
So,
thank you.
Actually, that's what I have ready. I'm sorry, English is not my first language, so I had to get my stuff.
Oh, you're fantastic. Thank you so much, Doctor. So Nelson, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I may say some things that are redundant. You forgive me because the call dropped and I have to call in again. So, perdónenme. But I'll try to speed through it. This answer, I in 3 minutes I would cover, and I would suggest that 2 dimensions: there's the political and the economic, and they're deeply, they're almost synonymous. Politically, Puerto Rico is a colony. It never stopped being a colony. They created a supposed Commonwealth in 1953, but Dr. Federico specifically mentioned Jose T. Monge's book, Puerto Rico, the last trial of the last colony in the world, which very detailedly and specifically repudiates the entire Commonwealth relationship. I mean, the title of the book is clear, Trial of the Last Colony in the World. It was published by the Yale University Press, but the significant element is the author. Jose T. Monge was the principal draftsman of the first draft of the Constitution of Puerto Rico, and together with Luis Muñoz Marin, Monge, was the Attorney General of Puerto Rico, and he was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Puerto Rico for 11 years. He and Luis Muñoz Marin were the principal advocates at the UN, at the Congressional Subcommittee hearings, convincing everyone that this Commonwealth was for real. So it's very significant that the person that wrote the Commonwealth relationship, that Puerto Rico, he was involved with the Puerto Rico Federal Relations Act, Public Law 600, with a plebiscite process. Then he repudiates it in the end. But that repudiation now has become very complete because in the last few months, both the Obama administration argued before the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court agreed that Puerto Rico is a territorial possession of the United States. And then in the same week, and it was in 2 cases, the Sanchez Valle and the Franklin Trust v. California. In the same week that Sanchez Valle was decided, Congress unilaterally, with a full vote, passed the PROMESA bill in the same week. So what you have is all 3 branches of the U.S. federal government declaring in a coordinated fashion and agreeing that Puerto Rico is a territorial possession of the United States. In other words, that's the classic definition of a colony. So if anyone wants to argue this matter, I guess they can argue it now with the entire federal government of the United States. And because of that, we now have the PROMESA legislation and the Financial Control Board controlling 25 agencies in Puerto Rico. Economically, and I'll just jump really quickly though, what that's translated into is something, an abomination such as the Jones Act, which is Section 27 of the Merchant Marine Act of 1920, and the direct result of that is Puerto Ricans pay 15 to 20% more for every product that comes into Puerto Rico, and it's all at highly hyper-inflated prices where American corporations get to slightly underbid all the foreign registry vessels because the foreign registry vessels under the Jones Act either have to go to Jacksonville, Florida, or pay an enormous schedule of fees, duties, and transfer costs if they come directly into Puerto Rico, and all of those costs get passed on to the consumer. So Puerto Rico is specifically prohibited from having its own shipping industry, from negotiating its own international trade relations, or having its own economy. It is, if it weren't for the Jones Act, there would be no public debt. The Jones Act is costing Puerto Rico between $2 to $5 billion per year for the last 96 years. So that's where we are. They inject debt into the Puerto Rican economy because that's the only expedient that they allow it, because they don't allow a private sector economy to develop, and they specifically prohibit Puerto Rico from developing its own international trade relations. That's the history of colonialism in Puerto Rico.
Thank you. Ani?
So to answer this question, I wanted to speak to, first of all, I was very interested in doing participating in this project because of my lack of knowledge of Puerto Rico's history. And I think that's a very common thing for Puerto Rican youth in the mainland to not really know much about the history of Puerto Rico. And I think that lack of knowledge really speaks to the impact of colonialism. Actually, non-Puerto Ricans also lack the knowledge of Puerto Rico. I often get people talking to me about learning for the first time when I talk to them that Puerto Rico is a U.S. territory, so I didn't even know that we were a territory. And when speaking to the relationship between the United States and Puerto Rico, I would say it's one of a colonial relationship, like has been said already. And what that means to me is that we don't have the same rights as the people on the island as the American citizens. And in addition to that, as a colony, we're dependent on the resistance, or we're dependent on the limitations and the restrictions that the United States impose on Puerto Rico. And this control and this power, I think, limits the Puerto Ricans in Puerto Rico and their economic development. And I want to end by saying that often when speaking on the history of Puerto Rico and the Puerto Rican experience, historically and still on today, it's an experience of almost like a second-class citizen. And I say second-class citizen as in not having the same opportunities and same rights as other American citizens.